Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of our attendees joining us today for this latest Data Science Central webinar. This is Bill Vorhies, your host. I'm the Editorial Director with Data Science Central and also Chief Data Scientist for Data Magnum. So I'd like to start off our event today by thanking Qlik for sponsoring today's event. Qlik's a longtime supporter of the Data Science Central community, and we're honored having them sponsor our event today. Past webinars are available on demand at datasciencecentral.com. If you haven't had the opportunity to view them, I encourage you to take a look. They provide some very useful insight into a wide variety of topics of interest to our data science community. So today's webinar is titled Data Literacy, Bridging the Gap, to be presented by Qlik. But before we begin, I'd like to briefly review the format for today's webinar. Today's event will be an hour long. We have one presenter who I'll introduce in just a minute. There'll be 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A following the presentation. And this event is being recorded and will be available on datasciencecentral.com later this afternoon following today's live event. Now, I'd also like to encourage our attendees to provide questions throughout the presentation, as we'll be reviewing and presenting them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of today's event. Well, I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Jordan Morrow with Qlik. Now, Jordan is the Program Manager of Data Literacy for Qlik, helping individuals and organizations realize their data and analytical potential by bringing to light and enhancing skills in data literacy. Now, when not doing data and analytics, he can be found with his family or trail running in the mountains of Utah. Jordan, thanks for being with us today. We're looking forward to your presentation. With the volume and velocity of data available in the world today, most industries and companies have a desire to use data better. Unfortunately, as data has grown at incredible speeds, there has followed a real and growing data literacy skills gap. The skills gap can lead to major issues within organizations, which is why understanding what data literacy is and how to alleviate this gap is so important. So in today's Data Science Central webinar, learn more about the growing data literacy skills gap and what exactly data literacy is and how your organization can be better prepared in the current data revolution. So Jordan, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can begin as soon as you're ready to go.
Hi, and thank you, Bill. I'm very excited to be here. Welcome, everybody, wherever you are. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm very excited to be speaking about a topic that I'm very passionate about, which is data literacy. As Bill said, I'm program manager, and I'm the global head of data literacy here at Qlik, and so it gives me a great opportunity to be building a program, to be working with so many people around what I find to be a very crucial and important topic when we jump into data science and different topics of that field. Before Bill did a little intro of me, and I'll make sure to confirm all that, of course. I am the trail running analytical nerd. That's how I like to describe myself. I have a lot of fun in the mountains and on the trails, and you can usually find me there in the early morning hours, but I'm also a family man. I have 5 children, so as you can imagine, I have a lot of data gathering devices in my home with those 5 kids, and can, if I want, run my own data science experiments within my family. But what I want to do is really focus on our topic at hand, which is data literacy. And so I want to cover our agenda, but first I want to speak to you about 3 different numbers, 3 statistics that just recently came out. And this was done from a survey that I got to help participate in that had over 5,000 respondents. So it was a good, large number of respondents that we had to gather this information. And with these 3 numbers, what I want you to do is keep them in the back of your mind as I go through this presentation. They might not mean a whole lot right at the beginning, but keep them in your mind and think about them as we go through different pieces of this presentation. So hopefully you can understand a little bit more of the gap and the power that data literacy has for organizations. So the first statistic I want to share with you is that from the survey that was conducted, only 17% of workers are data literate, so fully confident in their ability to read, work with, and do things with data. But most people who use data in their current job will agree that data not only helps them do their job better, that was a 90% response rate, but enhances their credibility, 70% in the workplace. So those are the three numbers I want you to focus on as we go through this and think about it. The other thing that I want you to think about is as we progress through this agenda, I want it to feel like it is a flow. I want it to feel like it is a story. We're going to start by establishing how we got to the place where we are, which is this data skills gap that exists in the world. Then we're going to progress and get into how we understand what data literacy itself is. We're going to understand data literacy. We're going to go through examples of use cases where companies are utilizing the different avenues of data to really get us ahead of where we want to be. Finally, we're going to talk about a few different things that I have bucketed, as you can see within the agenda, into data literacy learning. And what I mean by this is how can organizations adopt skills and really upskill and uplift the skill sets that they have in their organization regarding data. So hopefully that agenda makes sense. Remember, we will be progressing through this, but without further ado, let's jump in and let's talk about the data literacy skills gap. So part of what we have here is the data literacy skills gap might be a term you're not necessarily too familiar with, but you probably have heard things around this, right? I'm sure through the media we have seen that there's a technology skills gap. We're seeing now that organizations are not able to hire data scientists at the rate that they might be wanting to at this point in time. And so many different terms might be thrown around with regards to data literacy, but we'll jump into a specific definition of what that is. But let's first define this gap that I'm talking about. And to do this, we're going to start off by looking at some numbers themselves. I want us to kind of progress to the point where we understand how much data truly is being produced. Now, I understand that the audience on our call today is going to range from those that are data scientists that have the skill sets here, all the way down to probably some who are just beginning or trying to get into this field. And what I want to make sure I do is I don't want to alienate or push anyone aside. So when you're thinking through this, if you're a data scientist who understands a lot about this, take a look at everything that I'm sharing from the viewpoint of those that you work with and for, helping to understand how you might be able to make their lives easier with data. And then to those that are in the beginning, this is going to be brand new to you. It's going to be great, hopefully, that you'll be able to paint the picture and understand where you can get your skills. And then we're going to have a vast group in between. So let's talk about this flood of data that has been happening. And some numbers I want to show you come from a webinar that was done by Intel in August of last year. So this is a slide that is showing us the rise of connected things, essentially the Internet of Things. If you think about the Internet of Things, a lot of us know what that means, but if you don't, it essentially means where everything is connected. Everything is connected online, and it gives us the ability to collect data, and all this data is coming through. If we take a look at the left-hand side of this slide, we can see that they think by 2020, there will be 50 billion devices and 212 billion sensors, okay? That is the connections that will be created that will be collecting data or could be generating data. If we look at the right-hand side of this data, or excuse me, of this slide, we see that it is generating tremendous amounts of data. So every day in 2020, this is what we're predicting. 1.5 gigabytes internet users per day, 4,000 gigabytes self-driving cars per day. All of this data is coming through. Connected planes, and I will actually speak about connected planes here in a little bit because I find it such a fascinating way to utilize data. And finally, 1 million gigabytes of connected factory data per day. That is so much data that is coming around here. And remember, we're trying to establish this skills gap that exists. A few more numbers to share with you. By IFL Science says that 90% of the data in the world today, and this is from June of this year, 90% of the data in the world today was produced in the last 2 years. So we know that recently we are creating and collecting so much data. I mean, it's only a few years ago that that term big data really became a catchphrase and really started to get utilized more. Some other statistics from Analytics Week. One estimate suggests that by better integrating big data, healthcare could save as much as $300 million. For a typical Fortune 1000 company, just a 10% increase in data accessibility will result in an increase of $65 million of additional net income. And finally, and this is the one that kind of puts this into perspective, at the moment, less than 0.5% of all data is ever analyzed and used. Okay, so if we have data scientists on the call, that's got to be a shockingly low number. And for the people that are brand new, that's also got to be shockingly low because it illustrates the potential that is there. But remember, we're talking about a skills gap. So if that much is being analyzed, 0.5% of all the data is ever analyzed, there's got to be some reason that we're driving it. Remember, that number from earlier in the survey was 17%. So let's talk about one use case that I really enjoy, and this comes from a large healthcare company. Unfortunately, I cannot share the name of it, but I do want to share what they are doing. This large healthcare company is really trying to figure out how to make things better for their patients, really trying to be proactive and understand how they can help their patients. So they are using the connected devices and the Internet of Things. They are connecting and having patients wear these wearables on their wrists that is then transmitting the data, and I believe automatically into the home, whatever Bluetooth or sensor is collecting that data. They are transferring it into the home, sending it to Qlik, Cloudera, through Hadoop, and all this interface to make it happen so that they can gather greater insight. And through that insight, they can incentivize their groups. So they're targeting the most at-risk population, and I believe the one they're focused on right now is diabetes. Having the ability to monitor diabetes differently, looking at health patterns, eating patterns, so on and so forth. It is utilized to incentivize populations, giving them that ability to kind of grab things before it happens, seeing trends and patterns that are going to make that happen. And finally, the data is collected and analyzed. That last bullet point is the key. We have to have skilled people in the position to be able to do that analysis. Without those skills sitting in those positions, it's not going to be effective. I'm sure most people on this call, whether it's a technology project or some other program that they have been looking at, have sat there before, tried to invest in a project, and it fell by the wayside. And part of the reason that it falls by the wayside, unfortunately, is one, people probably don't have a full buy-in or understanding, but two, the skills just aren't there to make it happen. And if we're only analyzing 0.5% of the data that exists, we have a major opportunity to do things, but we have to be able to upskill people to do that. So one of the things, remember, we're talking about a progression here. One of the things that is leading us to see this data skills gap that we see is the fact that data is just being produced at very quick amounts. If you think about that, 90% of the data is being produced in the last 2 years. Usually, if you go to school for a computer science, computer engineering, a data science, mathematical degree, for a minimum, you're probably spending about 4 years at university to get that undergrad or bachelor level degree. And then if you want to go on to graduate, we're talking 2 to 3 more years, maybe even 4 or 5. But in reality, if the last 2 years have produced 90% of the data, that gap is there, and we can see that it's been created. Let's talk about a couple other things that are creating it, that is causing this gap to happen. The first one I want to talk about is the democratization of data. And to start off, I want to talk about the definition of this, if it's something people have not heard. If you do a quick Google search of this definition, the democratization means the process of expanding business information and the tools to analyze it out to a much broader audience than traditionally has had access. Okay, another one that I found, another definition from What is Tech Target said, the goal of data democratization is to allow non-specialists to be able to gather and analyze data without requiring outside help. Now that seems like a great idea, but what if those people who are then given access to the data do not have the proper skills to analyze that data? Right, I think we've probably run into issues before when we're dealing with data, whether we share it with someone, and there are a lot of questions that come back. A lot of feedback comes back because the people just don't understand what it's going. Later in that article it says, when ownership for data is distributed among independent business functions, a sea change in corporate culture may be required before data democratization can become a reality. Now, this is one thing we'll talk about later, but that is such an interesting quote because it says the sea change of corporate culture. Now, I don't know about you, but if you've ever been a part of a project to try and shift and change corporate culture, you run into a lot of walls and a lot of barriers. You will never find me advocating that if you want to become a data literate organization, you have to have a full-blown overhaul of your culture. You'll find out later what I mean by that. I will discuss my thoughts around that. But through those quotes that I just mentioned, we can see that by spreading it out to people, we're trying to give them the ability to utilize that data without any outside help. That's a big step. Because if you're just giving data to people, maybe they're brand new at the company, brand new in their career, and haven't been utilizing data for a very long time, that is a very big step. That is something to say, hey, I'm sure you already know how to use this, so go for it. Well, later in the article, I think the article kind of backtracked a little to say, oh, guess what? If you're going to try to democratize the data, it might take a big change to happen. Well, that's what data literacy is about, and we'll expand on that. But historically, the reason this has been such an issue, and we'll actually talk about a progression through this, is usually data has sat within the developers in the IT world, maybe risk has a part of it, there's a governance around it, and it is a smaller nucleus of people who produce the data and share it out. Well, now we're trying to get it to all these different people through the self-service of tools of so many different things. One of the things that it should be discussed here is the fact that we have seen so many different tools that have been created in the world of data in the last few years. If you think about it, think about all the tools your organization has been hit with, been told to utilize this because this will help you out, it's going to help you succeed, and then you bring that on board. Well, not only now do you have to have the ability to learn all these tools, you also have to have the ability to understand data. And so here we go back to that discussion on being able to utilize data correctly, and we're not there. Because not only do we have to learn data, we have to learn to use a tool, and projects fall through. Let's actually talk a little bit about the landscape of traditional business intelligence, how it is progressing forward more into artificial intelligence, and a term that we like to use here at Qlik that I like a little bit more than, well, a lot more than artificial intelligence, which is the augmented intelligence. I want to walk us through a progression of what we've seen. And to begin that, let's talk a little bit about how business intelligence kind of was set up. It's been around for a very long time, but I would say that it really became more prevalent in the 80s with the advent of databases, the personal computers, and things like that. So business intelligence became something more powerful. And here we can see the traditional BI setup. Developers would generate reports for small parts of an organization. Decision equality at this point was really among the data haves at this point, not the data have-nots. Okay, so basically what was happening, traditional BI was built about artifacts. You would build a report, you would build these things that would then be updated or utilized. There really wasn't a democratization going on. It was really going from developers and this small little world from whether it was IT and this nucleus, then being pushed out to the consumers. One question to ask yourself, well, what happens to data literacy in a scenario like this, where the IT world and the developers are honing in and they have all the access right there, and it is being distributed to the specific groups that are asking or requesting these different reports. Well, there's a gap there, as you can imagine, where what we're seeing is not a spread out throughout the organization. The data haves are going to have a lot more success knowing data literacy and that. So essentially, the rest of the organization is kind of falling behind or falling through the cracks at this point. Now, as time has gone on, modern BI, as it says here, expands on this. So we are expanding on developers to producers with the creation of analytical tools, right? So we're getting to see this progress. We're seeing guided apps, the beginning of data discovery. This increased access to analytics introduces the idea that non-IT or developer people can be producing analytics. So we're starting to see the advent of probably data visualization tools, some of these other things that it doesn't have to necessarily sit just in that nucleus, but it can now expand out to maybe a smaller group, not the broad audience, but we are expanding a little bit, which is helping data literacy. So that's a good thing. So it's probably improving a little bit, but again, it is still going to be very linear. IT is going to be holding the keys at this point and are focused on creation and tools, and the data haves are expanding more and more knowledge. They're getting more and more skills within data discovery, so on and so forth, whereas the rest of the organization is falling behind. Now, as we progress a little bit more, we see now that engagement and activity starts to emerge in the overlaps between different skilled groups. So this is the one keys I want you to be thinking of when it comes to data literacy. There are many different skills within organizations when it comes to data. And there are many different skills that are required by different levels of an organization. It would be my argument that the executive level does not have to have the skills of the data scientist, or it might be that the data scientist doesn't have to have the skills of the business user, although they will naturally. So many different areas, and these skills start to overlap. Now, this overlap between the groups is encouraging more use and the diverse use of analytics that are being created. It also has the encouragement and facilitation of activities, which is helping. But again, we're still seeing that it is still probably more linear than we want it to be. The data has continued to improve in their decision quality, but because it is still that strong nucleus, data literacy among those not accessing the data often, not having democratized data, not having self-service products, the gap is growing at this point. As we expand, we're going to see the engagement with analytics grows through better facilitation and governance. One of the keys that has happened through the big data revolution and the amount of data that we are seeing, and one of the big things that has happened with the advent of all the easy tools that we're able to use now, is better facilitation of the data, and secondly, governance of the data. One of the things you're not going to find me advocating for when we talk about democratization of data or improving data literacy, et cetera, is just a free-for-all with data. We know that that cannot happen, right? If you think about it, we have to have governance. There needs to be security around the data, more of a governed democratization of data and a governed self-service. The moment you start allowing everybody just a free-for-all and your systems of records are not necessarily used and this and that, two different numbers can be presented in two different settings, causing issues, so on and so forth. So what we're seeing is the increase in data is also helping us to increase the governance and understanding of the governance. So as we grow, now we look at this slide that we have on here, and we can see that we've kind of hit a plateau within the business intelligence world. We have all these people on the outside of the circles, all these people that are a part of the organization that should have access to data in some way or in some form, and not only have access to that data, but they should have skills to deal with that data. And because of this gap, we need to be able to close it, right? It is additive at this point. We see that most of the org is untouched and it's not benefiting, so we need to be able to see what happens. Now, what we want to start to see happening is an interaction between the groups, right? Cross-pollinating. We want to see data literacy permeating throughout because more and more people are starting to use it. And once the focus shifts from just tools and traditional artifacts to a system that connects people and their ideas, this can start to open things up. More analysis and more content is created, more shared. It becomes more about the right information to the right people in the right place at the right time with the right context. Now, I just use the word right a lot, but I think it gets the point across that data should be used correctly. It should be used in the right context, in the right framework, and we need to upskill people to do that. And as we do that, we're going to be creating environments and cultures that facilitate the entire organization with data. That's one of the keys. We're going to talk more about this later on. Okay, that word culture is coming up again. Culture is key here. And remember, I'm not talking a full-blown let's change everything. I'm more speaking to this will allow culture to automatically evolve with data. So finally, what we're looking for as we progress through all this is an analytics ecosystem that you see here, where it's more than the sum of its parts. We have participants times data times engagement. We have everybody working together. The problem is we're not at this point. Remember, from the statistics I showed earlier, that 17% said that they felt data literate. The two other stats, I don't want to leave them behind. 90% said that data will not only help them do their job better, but 70% said it enhances their credibility, right? So we're dealing with all this data. We know there's a skills gap, but what do we do at this point? Well, let's take a look. Here we have this gap, right? This is my illustration of the gap. You could be picturing a Grand Canyon. You could be picturing a small little bridge, whatever the case may be. But essentially, and this is a quote that I like to use from the Harvard Business Review, and I believe it came from 2012. And it says, the shortage of data scientists is becoming a serious constraint in some sectors. That's 5 years ago from where this quote came. One of the key things I do want to point out here, and this is, I think our understanding has evolved. I think we're at a new position where we understand not everybody needs to be a data scientist. I think that does not facilitate or permeate the culture that we want, that ecosystem that we just looked at. We need people that all be data literate, but that's going to mean different things to different groups throughout an organization. We have people over here on the left, and we need to get them over here on the right of the page. We need people to upskill themselves. So in review, before we actually go on to define data literacy itself, I want to review kind of what led us there. So if you remember, we talked about the gap at that very beginning. We talked about all of the data that is being produced. And I think everybody on this call, whether this is your first time seeing how much data is being produced or whether you've seen statistics like that before, there are lots of them out there. Data is being produced at ways that probably 10 to 20 years ago we weren't thinking about, or very few people were even imagining that was possible, to now we're at this point where there's so much data and only 0.5%, going back to that statistic, are using it. Okay, so then we understand that not only do we have all this data, the democratization of data came out, and self-service analytics, where people are doing it on their own. They're not taking it from maybe from the developers of the IT world. And when you democratize something out, but you don't have the skill sets to keep up with it, you're going to be left behind. And that's what we've seen. We've seen this little gap that has occurred, which we don't want to occur. Finally, we see all these tools being produced, all these tools that are promising life will be easier, how many different ways to use this, how many different ways to use that. But the reality is when you invest in tools, not only are you throwing tools at people that they have to learn, but if they're not comfortable with data, I'm guessing those investments in those tools are not coming to fruition like you would have hoped historically. So here we are. We've created this data literacy skills gap. We've seen that something has got to change. Well, now I want to jump in and define data literacy itself for you. And to do this, I'm actually going to be using a lot of descriptions, a lot of use cases, because I want to kind of drive this context home. Remember, whenever you talk to me, you'll find very quickly that I'm all about context and in the right setting. And if I use real-world examples to do this, it'll make more sense. So let's define data literacy for you. To start off, I want you to think of data literacy in the format of literacy itself. Someone I have begun working with who gave a great essential webinar on a similar topic a few weeks ago is Donald Farmer, and he is very passionate about literacy. And if you think about it, I like how he speaks to literacy. If you think about literacy and where it has stood historically and what it has done for just the human race in general. If you think about the Renaissance and the revolutions that have occurred, the ability to read in general is powerful. Now, let's take it a step further and take a look at it in the aspects of data. The definition I like to subscribe to, and there are many out there, is data literacy includes the ability to read, work with, analyze, and argue with data. It is this all-encompassing ability to utilize data. And Valerie Logan actually came up with a very similar definition in a toolkit that was just launched from Gartner. One of the things that I love from one of the things she shared earlier in the year is Valerie said that 80% of organizations by 2020 are going to put into place training after acknowledging the extreme deficiencies they have in data literacy. She likes to say that information as a second language. We need to become more comfortable with data and data literacy in general. We need to have that ability to read with data, to work with it, to analyze it, and to argue with it. And I'm going to cover each one of these pieces specifically so that we have a good grasp, a firm grasp on what we're meaning by it. But before I jump in and do that, I want to kind of show a pendulum. So here we have this pendulum. On one side is going to be the quote we saw earlier, on the other is a different one from, I believe, the exact same Harvard Business Review article. On the right-hand side of this pendulum, or this scale, we have the shortage of data scientists is becoming a serious constraint in some sectors. That is a very powerful quote. Remember, we don't all need to be data scientists, but the shortage of data literacy is a constraint. On the other side of the scale, it says the data scientist is going to be the sexiest job of the 21st century. Now, I don't know about you. I don't know about all of the data fans and geeks and nerds and people like me out there, but I don't know if I ever would have pictured this profession as being called the sexiest job of the 21st century. So get a smile on your face, and we're here in Data Science Central's webinar talking about something that is very powerful and a skill that is very necessary. So let's jump in. Let's take a look at this and define this a little bit better. Let's give everybody a better understanding what I mean when we talk about this. And the first one is reading data. Okay, so reading data is a big thing to me. Okay, so what I want to talk about first with this is the definition of the word read. Okay, and if you Google the definition of the word read, one of them that you'll find, it says, look at and comprehend the meaning of rented or printed matter by mentally interpreting the characters and symbols of which it is composed. So data comes to us nowadays in many different formats. You can look at it in tabular format, it's binary. You can look at it in text. We're seeing so much data being created by social media and being able to analyze that. It comes in visualizations. I mean, Qlik itself is a visualization, analytics visualization company, empowering you to simplify so you're not looking at a massive data set. You're able to visualize it. You can look at it in so many different ways. So data comes to us in many different ways, requiring different skill sets to be able to read that data. It takes one thing to be able to read complex data sets, maybe the developers on the back end or a data architect, versus maybe just a simplified, powerful visualization on the front end. Being able to read that data is very powerful. So a data scientist does have a different need than maybe a business user versus the analyst and so forth. One company that I want to talk about with regards to reading data is one that I find very fascinating, and that company is called Premise. And I'm not sure many people, whenever I usually do this presentation in person and I ask people, have you ever heard of the company Premise, most people say no. They don't feel that they have ever heard of it. So I want to walk through what they do. Premise was started by a PhD, a doctorate, where this person was not comfortable with GDP or economic data. And he just felt it was, he felt it wasn't very powerful or worthwhile. Because it just, if you think about some third world countries that have maybe more black market deals and things of that nature, GDP might not be a great reflection of data itself for those countries. So what he did is he hired a lot of people with cameras, and he sent people with cameras out into the field, out into countries to take pictures of different things that they thought would be good for economic indicators. So they might send pictures back of gas station lines. They might send pictures back of baskets in a market. Whatever the case may be, whatever they thought was powerful, they would send it back. That's one way of reading quote-unquote data, being able to go out and take a look at it. Those images were then sent back to the computer scientists of the company, of Premise, who then would change that data. So they had to read data in a different way. They would change those images into analyzable, if that's a word, analyzable information, who then passed it on to the business, or the business analysts took it from there. A third way of having to read data. They would then take the data that was changed and transformed by the computer scientists to get information so that they could analyze these different countries. 3 different levels of being able to read data differently. So this company, Premise, now sells their information to the World Bank, I believe. They sell it to hedge funds. It's become an organization that's profitable because someone had an idea that data could be read differently and done differently. So when we think of the definition of data literacy, reading is key, being able to read the data in some way. Always remember that it's going to come in different levels. Okay, it's going to come across in different levels. The second part of that definition is working with data, and working with data can mean many things. So I want you to be thinking about what it could mean to you. Okay, one company that I want to talk about is Kroger. Kroger, in a joint venture with dunnhumby, the company is accessing, collecting, and managing data for about 770 million consumers. Okay, then they take all that data and use big data and all that to gather more insights on customer loyalty and profitability. I came from a company, a large credit card company, I won't mention their name, where they are working with data pretty sophisticated, in a very sophisticated manner, trying to understand how they can grab people, how they can grab them and create more loyalty, create better offers, to really make it more of a relationship between the customer and the company. Another organization, Southwest Airlines, I find very interesting, is they're using speech analytics to improve interactions between customers and personnel. Working with data can mean many different things. So those are just examples of companies that are working with data. Now let's bring it down to your organization. Maybe you're a data scientist that is producing some pretty intense and wonderful predictive modeling, statistical analysis, whatever the case may be. And to you, it makes total sense. But as you're working with that data and sharing it with people, we need to understand that as we share it with people, they're not going to be at the same level, probably, that as you, the data scientists, are. So they're going to work with that data differently. Then as we present it maybe to the executive or C-level suite, they too are going to be working with it differently. At the lower levels, you might be getting more into the grainy details of everything working with that data, whereas the executive level might just want quick power hits so they understand some trends and analysis to go on. Working with data means doing statistical analysis, all the way to building strong visualizations and storyboards and dashboards that paint a picture of what data is doing, that help paint a story to help people understand. So working with data, just like reading data, has many different facets to it, gives us many different opportunities to work with it in different ways. One of the things that I'd like all of us to do more is put ourselves in the shoes of those that we're working with. I had the opportunity to see Claudia Imhoff speak once talking about the new role that organizations are seeing, and that is the data interpreter. And what those people are, they're essentially the people who are receiving analysis. They're the ones receiving data, and they have to be the ones to interpret it. When we're working with data, if we're working to make it easier for others, it will make the whole picture a little more successful. The next one is analyzing data, and this one is a little more sophisticated, as you can think. We have to be able to analyze data. Now, this can be from a data visualization perspective, all the way to the deep diving machine learning, Markov chain analysis, statistical analysis, so forth. Analyzing data to gather insights to be more data-driven. That's a catchphrase that we hear very often right now, is that organizations want to be data-driven. Well, in order to properly be data-driven, we need data literacy, and we need to be able to analyze the data. One of my favorite companies that I've studied and looked at with data literacy is UPS, the delivery company. And it uses data very effectively. So it has, and I believe this is a couple years old, this data, but over 4 billion items shipped per year through almost 100,000 vehicles. Okay, so that is a lot of packages being passed around. Now, what they do is they have on-truck telematics and advanced algorithms that help with the routes, the engine idle time, predictive maintenance, different things that they've looked at. Now, through this, the company has saved over 39 million gallons of fuel and avoided driving 364 million miles. So think about the gas savings that they've had alone from that. Okay, it's pretty powerful that when you analyze data in different ways, it comes to life. And one of the key things that we've seen through this influx of data that we're having in the world today is the advent of all this social media data. Having that ability to sit there and be able to understand what is truly coming through social media data, that's powerful, to be able to analyze text. So many different things that we want to see happen as we analyze and go through data. The final piece of the definition is to argue with data. Now, this does not mean arguing as, like I said earlier, I have 5 kids, trust me, they can argue with the best of them. Now, that is not what we're talking about when it comes to data in any way, shape, or form. What we want to talk about when it comes to data and arguing with data is I'm going to go to a definition. So if you Google it, one definition you'll find is to argue means give reasons or cite evidence in support of an idea, action, or theory, typically with the aim of persuading others to share one's view. A very common question that I get as I speak to people about data literacy is, how do I get people to get away from gut feel? Businesses for such a long time have been running on gut feel, what they feel works best, right? Earlier I mentioned a term that Qlik is using because I think a lot of people are fearful from artificial intelligence. We want augmented intelligence. Data can tell us so many different things, but we need the human touch to be in there with it. When we argue with data, think about the power that comes with that. If you're trying to shift mindsets, if you're trying to persuade people, this ability to argue with data and have your position solidified by data itself allows you to do that. And I forgot to put that up there. I'm so passionate, as you can tell. One of the things, remember the 3 statistics that I talked about earlier, 17% feel fully data literate. One of the numbers was 70% that were using data felt it lended more credibility to their job. And that makes sense. Imagine you have a theory or idea that you're trying to get past or work through in your organization, but you have no data to support it. Conversely, if you have data to support a theory or what you're seeing, this and that, it's easier to get it powerful, it's easier to put the message across, and it allows us to put things in place. So arguing with data, remember, it's not the contentious way, it's not being cynical, anything like that, but it's being objective and saying, this is what the data is showing us. Let's analyze it, let's read it, let's work with it so that we can come up with a good data literate answer and response to move forward with what we're doing. So before I move on to the next portion, which is how can we actually do some of these things, just want to review the definition itself. Remember, data literacy is that ability to read. Reading can mean many different things. It can mean the ability of a data scientist all the way to a new user. It is the ability to work with data. It doesn't mean you have to be able to do statistical analysis or hard coding. Not everybody needs to be doing that, but being able to work with visualizations and presentations and data and stories to be able to show trends and what is happening. We need to be able to analyze that data, and that again does not mean doing only deep dive analysis, but it means that we enable and empower everyone in the organization with the skill to see trends, to be able to understand what is going on in the business. And finally, we want to empower everybody with data literacy so they can argue with data better. And again, what I mean by that is the ability to use proof and to use data to back what you're saying. And as you do that, it is easier to get things across. Now, I'm talking about data literacy and that everybody needs it. It is much easier said than done to say, everybody go out and get data literacy. I want to provide what I call data literacy learning, or a framework that helps establish data literacy in organizations. And to do that, these are what I would call the building blocks of data literacy learning. At the very bottom, we have data literate, but we're going to start at the top, which I would say is the biggest thing that we need to work with and might be the hardest thing, and that is culture. Then once culture is permeating and working better, you can jump into the learning side of it. And we'll talk about different aspects of learning and what can be done with learning. Finally, I want to talk about the utilization that occurs. And utilization is a big key when it comes to data literacy, being able to utilize what you're building and utilize it effectively. But let's start off with culture. And I don't know if I could say the word difficult often enough, but to shift an entire culture of an organization is going to be difficult, and forever, right? That is not what I'm talking about when it comes to a data literate culture. When you talk about the culture of an organization, cultures are the norms, the customs, and everything that have been built for years, the things that have been cultivated, that there's good in organizations. When I talk about a data literacy culture, I am talking about permeating data throughout the organization, investing in the right training and skills to help everybody to succeed when they start analyzing that 0.5% of data and helping that number to go higher. Okay, one of the things that I like to look at with culture is that culture has roots in the word cultivate, right? If you think about cultivating a garden or whatever it may be, to cultivate, we want to talk about learning and being able to develop different skills, or acquiring those skills, developing those skills. That, if you Google to cultivate, it basically says to acquire and then improve upon. Okay, that's what we want to do. We want to cultivate a culture of data literacy. We want to help empower people to acquire the skills, to feel empowered, to feel credibility. Okay, another statistic from that survey that came about was that of the people who felt that they were fully data literate, over 3/4 of them felt they were performing very well in their job. Okay, on the flip side of that, of those who did not feel fully data literate, just under half of those people felt like they were performing very well in their job. If you want a culture to succeed with data, you want everybody to feel like they're performing very well in their job, that they're empowered with data. So start making it permeate throughout. One great quote that comes is, organizations with neglected learning cultures experience high talent turnover, struggle to keep customers, and ultimately fall behind competitors. So not only do we want a culture where data and the conversations and the usage of data is permeating throughout an organization, we want the learning culture to be there. And let's jump into that piece of the pie right now. Learning is key, right? If you think about it, I talked earlier about obtaining degrees as it comes to data literacy. If you're wanting to obtain a bachelor's degree in math, it's probably going to take you 4 years, and then more if you want to go into advanced studies. That's not what we're talking about. Okay, I'm not telling everybody to go back to school. You find the appropriate learning that fits where you are in your career. Okay, you invest, whether it's instructor-led trainings, whether it's online modules that are built, whatever the case may be, you invest in learning. And not only do you invest in that learning, you let your team know that the constant cadence of learning is going to be supported by the organization, right? If from the top down to the bottom up, a grassroots approach, everybody feels comfortable in saying for 1 to 2 to however much time they're going to spend each week, I'm going to study data analysis or data literacy, how to read data better, etc. The culture will thrive. It will permeate throughout. Secondly, you then have people who feel that they're not going to be black-marked because they're trying to learn. Okay, so we want to make sure that there is a culture of learning. And most organizations do have a culture of learning and say, yes, we will invest in it. But people get so bogged down with the day-to-day job that it's hard for them to see the ability to do that. Make it a priority. The final piece that I want to talk about, before I jump into that, is a learning use case. One company that is happening, this is another healthcare company. They are developing these citizen developers, kind of this group, this army of subject matter experts within, data literacy, enabling them to go out and spread the word, this is kind of that, if you remember that ecosystem, this healthcare company is having this to expand out into many different arenas, helping the culture and everything to permeate throughout. So it's not just centered, it's not just a small group, but these citizen developers, these citizen armies are going around everywhere making sure this happens. Think about that within your organization, if that would be something that might work for you, or to piggyback off of it. The final piece in this is utilization, and this is one that I like to talk about, practice, practice, practice. When we talk about data and the usage of data, we have to get comfortable with the word failure, which might be something people don't like to hear, but as we're practicing things, we need to understand that people who are just beginning are not going to understand fully right off the bat. They're not going to be able to argue with data perfectly or analyze it perfectly. We need to be comfortable with failure. One of my favorite examples of this is the company Pixar. I don't know about you, I've got 5 kids. Even without them, I would like these movies, but like Toy Story, Monsters, Inc., etc. They have a culture of failure. And what I mean by that is they are comfortable failing. Yeah, I mean, we've all heard the cliche, fail fast, be smart with it, etc. But allow that to happen within data literacy. Allow people to feel comfortable there. And as they do that, they will feel that way. The other side of it is, one way to measure data literacy is the usage of the organization. As we're using data, we understand that data literacy is going to be growing. It's going to be a subplot of it. The couple final things that I'll mention before we turn it over into Q&A is I'm very active on Twitter and LinkedIn. I would love for you to connect with me, reach out to me, and I'm also active on my blog that I have that is purely about data literacy. It's not about products. It's about thought leadership. It's about bringing to light what I find to be a very powerful topic. So I'd love to hear from you, have you reach out to me and connect with me. And before I turn it over, I want to go into a conclusion here. I want to do a quick review, and then I'll turn it back over to Bill. But if you think about what I've talked about today, I went through a progression. I went through a progression that data is powerful. We see so much of it being created today. We see tools that are powerful for our use. We see a democratization of all this coming about. I think one of the things that happened is we forgot about that we need skills to utilize it. And I'm sure people have felt pain points in this in their careers. We then progressed and defined data literacy. Find what it means to you. Find where you can improve in it. Transition that to the final thing that I covered, which was the building blocks. Utilize building blocks. Find how it works best within your organization, allowing you to build up data literacy properly. And then that 0.5% number that I keep bringing up will grow. We're going to utilize it more. Companies will be more effective. Employees will feel that credibility, and that 17% number will go up. So with that, I thank you so much. I'm talking about a topic that I'm very passionate about, that I love. So hopefully I've got some good questions that I can answer here. And with that, Bill, I'll turn it right back over to you.
Well, Jordan, thank you for that excellent presentation. And we'll get started with today's Q&A session. I want to thank the audience for their participation. We've had a lot of questions that have come in, and we'll do our best to get through them all during the time remaining. So during this Q&A session, I'll leave up this screen with contact information for Jordan if you'd like to contact him following today's webinar. So let's get started. Jordan, I guess the first question the audience is wondering about is how come we didn't see the skills gap coming, and why did it take companies so long to get on board with the idea of training for data literacy?
I think it's a very interesting question and an interesting point. I think that organizations, over time, we didn't know, for one, the power that data maybe held per se, but over time, essentially, we kept rolling out all these tools. We kept rolling out all this business intelligence tools, all these data tools, databases, so on and so forth, and we just kind of forgot. We kept training everybody on all of those things, but at the same time, I don't think it was at the forefront of our minds that, hey, we also should probably be training on these other pieces. And if we're not training on these other pieces, we see this gap that has occurred. And I think it just took a while for organizations to understand that we can't just look at those other pieces. We need to now be training for these other things, especially if we want them to be as powerful as we think we can. But unfortunately, I think it was just a misstep by the industry in that we were so pleased with everything going on with the tools, with how easy data was becoming accessible, we forgot about that human touch. And I think we're finally getting in touch with that now, seeing that there is going to be power with it.
Well, Jordan, thank you for that answer. Now, if an organization is going to undertake to train for data literacy, I guess the best place to start would be to measuring where they currently stand on data literacy. So do you have any advice on the best way to go about measuring the current state of data literacy and gapping that with where they need to go?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. One of the things that I'm focused on myself within the program that I run at Qlik is that exact thought process, is taking assessments to help organizations understand where they sit. Because it is very easy to say, let's take this on, but if we don't have a good framework or a prescriptive framework, it's going to be hard to do. So yes, the first thing I would say is organizations need to find out where their skill level is through assessments, conversations with me even, or whatever the case may be, but find out where that skill level is. One of the things, that big survey that I was a part of earlier, one of the things we try to do is couple people down into 4 different data personas. And those 4 different data personalities then make it easier to understand, okay, personality 1 has this skill level, personality 2, 3, 4, and so on. Then it's prescriptive in a roadmap to say, okay, we know where you sit. Let's find the training appropriate for that. If you go to dataequality.org, that's the website we do that on. Again, I'm not here to push products or anything, but it can get that assessment started for people, allowing them to understand where their organization sits. By taking that assessment, you then can look at a full-blown adoption program for data literacy. But that key step, like you said, is understanding where to go, and that's, you can look for assessments and things like that that enable you to understand your skill set, and then from there it's easier to map out what type of training groups need to have, whether it's intangible, tangible skills, technical, non-technical, etc. And then you start to permeate it throughout. But the one thing that I would say that is key with all of this is ensuring that the top level has full buy-in. So don't start running with something unless you have full-blown buy-in from the top of the organization all the way down. Because if you start running with it and the top of the organization doesn't buy in, it might fall by the wayside very quickly. So start with the assessment and getting buy-in, and then you can start to map out the trainings that people need to do.
Well, thank you. That makes perfect sense. Now, you talked about identifying 4 different data personas, so I presume that means that there are different tracks for the training through the organization. Is there a common place to start? The audience is wondering about, okay, what specific skills do we need? Where do we go to get those courses or MOOCs or other resources?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually the program. Oh, go ahead.
No, I just, the real core of the question is, what's the starting point?
Yeah, the starting point I would say is either twofold. One, reach out to me. And the reason I say that is the program that I'm building is very thought leadership based. It's not product based. And I want people to understand that very quickly from my position at Qlik, is I'm not there to sell anybody on using the Qlik product, whatever. No, this is a thought leadership based program that is designed for everybody to embrace. Whether you use Qlik or one of the other tools, that's fine. We want you to come to just see the program itself for what it is. I would say, one, reach out to me, and then conversations can happen with me regarding the positioning and everything like that. But the common place to start would either be to, one, take that assessment on dataequality.org, or 2, to reach out to me. And the reason I say that is, yes, what is being built right now by me is specific prescriptive roadmaps. Ways for organizations to fully adopt this. They're coming along, they're being built out and processed, but it enables an organization to see, okay, we have these 4 different personalities, these 4 different data personalities, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Jordan, the majority of my people are in group 3. What do you prescribe? And then we walk through and we take a look at what would be prescribed for those people to upskill themselves. Like, for example, one of the things that I'm very heavy on and big, which is a new thing for data scientists, I know some of them are probably already doing this, is the data scientist mentor for the data literate culture. And what I mean by that is a prescriptive training to help the data scientist become a mentor within the world, to become more comfortable, because that might sometimes be out of their comfort zone, but allowing them to understand that they have so much power in this new world of data literacy. Let's help spread it among everybody. That would be one of the prescriptive trainings that would come about from a discussion with me. But yes, like I said, start with the quiz to find out where you are, but secondly, just reach out. I am an open book. You will find that out about me very quickly. I'm very responsive and look forward to chatting to people who are interested in learning more about this.
Well, Jordan, thanks for that answer. Now, although you said that this was not tool specific, is is data visualization, of which Qlik is a good example, a preferred place to start, or are we talking somewhere even further back up the chain than visualization?
I would actually start probably a little bit further up the train. I do think data visualization is a very good spot to start because data visualization simplifies things. It enables people to understand data more readily, right? It's easier to understand trends going over time with a line chart for the past 5 years than it is looking at probably some sophisticated statistical analysis. But I would take a little bit step back further. One of the key beginning points to me when it comes to data literacy is thinking analytically. And what I mean by that is most people have thought about critical thinking before and how you dissect things and how you break apart problems. That's analytical thinking. So even before data visualization, start to find whether it's books on analytical or critical thinking or different ways to start to just mold the brain to understand how to think differently about data. To be honest, one of my favorite books or series to read about this for the beginners is the Freakonomics Series. And I'm not getting a royalty from them in any way by promoting them, but the Freakonomics Series takes a look at real-world data and shows people how they can analyze data differently, how they can look at things differently. It helps to prescribe the mind. So to me, I would start off from the kind of the beginning phase would be analytical thinking, getting the brain to understand how to pick apart problems, to dive into things differently. Then from there, yes, data visualization training is very powerful, but at the same time, it needs to be combined with data literacy training. And what I mean by that is it's powerful to teach a person how to use a data visualization tool and build a bar chart. But if the person doesn't know why they're building a bar chart, a histogram, a box plot, etc., the power is gone. So along with teaching them how to use a data visualization tool and how to interpret it, we need to teach them the why behind all of it. And when you do teach them the why behind all of it on using those different charts, then analytics becomes more powerful. So then you can progress beyond data visualization if that suits the route that you're looking to do and get into some more heavy stuff. So hopefully that clarified that a little.
Oh, yeah. And Jordan, you directly almost channeled some of our audience members who were observing, boy, we know a lot of folks in our organization, that can make the data say anything they want. So starting, with a good grounding in scientific method and quantitative analysis so that you draw the right conclusions from the data is terrifically important.
Yep, agree. And one of the things that we're seeing is how easy it is to manipulate data nowadays. We see the things like we're in a post-fact world, we see fake news, and all these different things being thrown about. One of the things that I really want to see grow from data literacy is individuals having the ability to interpret it correctly. Like you just said, that audience members are saying, you can make data pretty much say anything you want it to say. But being able to dig into it, find the signal from the noise, and really understand, to your point, scientific methods, interpretation, so on and so forth, to get the right answer is truly how to be data literate. Being able to manipulate things and stuff, that is the opposite end of the spectrum, and hopefully through data literacy, we are preventing that from happening.
Right. Well, thank you for that clarification. Last question, and this is perhaps more detailed and refers back to more of the beginning of your presentation where you talked about the democratization of data. And the audience asked, well, is democratization the same as self-service? Because we see that in different product pitches all the time.
Yeah, I would actually say that they are essentially along the same lines. I don't know if I could use the term synonymous, but pretty much if you think about what self-service is trying to do, self-service is trying to allow people to self-drive analytics, while self-service means that analytics has been democratized out to an organization. So yes, so if you're thinking about self-service and democratization, essentially I would say you can use those interchangeably, allowing you to think and understand, okay, self-service means we're allowing everybody to do stuff on their own, but again, the underlying problem is the why behind it. Do people have that ability underneath it all to be able to do that? And if they don't, that self-service, I had this happen at an organization I worked at where I tried to teach data literacy, and essentially data literacy, and was told no, just get people to use the tool. It fell flat on its face when the executives did not have buy-in, and it frustrated me now it frustrates me because everybody wants data literacy, but the issue is, yes, They're the same thing essentially. Make sure you have that good grasp of that when you hear these pitches, because you want to make sure that not only are you getting pitched self-service, make sure data literacy is falling behind too, that it's a part of it.
Well, Jordan, thank you. Those were great answers to some very good questions, and we can tell how deeply committed you are to this topic. For those of you that asked questions that weren't answered today, we'll be sending all the unanswered questions to Jordan and the Qlik team so they can follow up with you after today's webinar. I have just a few quick announcements. If you'd please mark your calendars for November 7th, that's our next DSC webinar, which will be predictive forecasting with time series analysis, and that'll be sponsored by IBM. Also, remember that today's taping will be available for on-demand viewing later today, and you can find that on the homepage of Data Science Central in the Webinar tab located at the top of the page. Well, this brings today's webinar to a close. I'd like to thank our audience for their attendance and thoughtful questions. A special thanks again to Qlik for their sponsorship, as well as to our speaker today, Jordan Morrow, for his insight into today's topic. This is Bill Vorhies. I'm very pleased to have been your host for today's event. I look forward to seeing you all again on November 7th. Have a great day.